Fight!
Conker's Bad Fur Day is a gaming legend. There, I said it. From its humble roots as yet another rare character-based platformer to the final product that hit store shelves, I cannot think of another game which took such a huge U-turn in what was originally conceived and what was finally delivered. If you've no doubt watched a ton of the beta footage of 12 Tales Conker's Adventure, then you may just be wondering how what appeared to be yet another cartoon-like platformer ended up becoming one of the rudest, crudest, and most mature games on the N64. The game was first announced at E3 in 1997 under the name Conker's Quest. The following year it was announced that the game had changed its name to 12 Tales Conker 64, and it would have you take control of Conker in action-based sequences, and then take control of Berry in more strategy areas of the game. There was some talk of also having a co-op mode where each player would take control of a character, and they would work together in tandem to progress through the game. Early viewers of the prototype were critical of the game and felt that they had already seen it all before, and that the game would enter a crowded genre of cute platformers already lined up for the system. Chris Seaver at Rare took the feedback to heart and took the game back to the drawing board. Influenced by really the general British humour and the explosion in South Park's adult cartoon themes, and also a huge amount of movies, the game quickly took on a whole mind of its own behind closed doors. As the months passed by, not a single new snippet came out of Rare as to what was happening with the game, leading many to believe that the game had actually been cancelled, and so that the two teams at Rare could focus on their other announced projects. This was not the case, however, and in the year 2000 we got our first glimpses as to what had become of the Ginger Hero. What nobody expected, however, was just how far away from the concept the actual game had been taken. After announcing the game would now be called Conker's Bad Fur Day, Rare let the community know that this wasn't going to be just another collectathon platformer. Out were the usual game platform tropes, out was the sickly sweet characters, and out was a target kid-friendly audience. But the gameplay direction was only the face of the game. Behind the scenes, the developers were doing an insane amount of work with the way in which the microcode was handled by the console's reality processor. After months of work, they found unique ways of tweaking the console hardware to their advantage to create an experience like we had never seen before. The game was so un-Nintendo-like that Nintendo Power Magazine boycotted much of the previews which they could have easily landed. They did this in protest at the game actively trying to achieve a mature rating, and also the fact that they didn't want to upset parents who purchased the magazine or the game for their kids. They were shocked at the marketing campaign, which even went as far as having pages in risque magazines such as Playboy. Nintendo of Europe actually went a step further and declined to publish the game, instead leaving THQ to handle the distribution of this side of the pond. But that's when the meddling by Nintendo actually came to an end, because prior to this they made Rare remove a cutscene which featured Pokemon, and unsurprisingly a skit where the humour came at the expense of the Ku Klux Klan. As much as I feel Nintendo can sometimes be overprotective of their audience, nothing says public outcry waiting to happen more than having racism an angle in a video game. Now we all know a kid from our school days who used to be an adorable, friendly, loved by all type of character, but then puberty hit and they became a completely different person. The same too can be said for Conker, who throughout the game embarks on a bizarre story of sex, violence and profanity. Oh, and poo jokes. Lots and lots of poo jokes. No matter what you've heard about the game, one thing's for sure is that I doubt you'll have ever spoken to anyone who played the game and forgot about it. Most critics place it in their top handful of N64 games, and despite its underperforming sales, it went on to become one of the most unique and era-defining N64 titles. Conker's Bad Fur Day is not your average Rare 3D platformer. The storyline goes a little something like this. After one too many pints down the pub with his mates, Conker is literally wasted, or pissed as a newt as I'd say. After calling his girlfriend Berry, he staggers from the pub and in his drunken stupor begins wandering home the wrong way. Meanwhile, the Panther King, sitting in his throne, loses a cup of milk because the table it was rested on had one leg shorter than the other. Summoning his paraplegic weasel scientist to find a solution, they conclude that a red squirrel is the perfect height to prop up the table, and so begins one of the weirdest stories in Nintendo 64 history. And shortly after, Berry is kidnapped unbeknownst to Conker, which actually serves as one of the game's ongoing comedic elements. Now, from looking at my YouTube channel analytics tab, I can see that the vast majority of my audience is male and of a similar age to me. And so I think it's safe to say there has been a time in each of our lives where we've been utterly shit-faced and had a random night whereby at the end of it, and when you start sobering up, you can't quite believe what's just happened and how you've ended up where you are. That, my friends, is essentially Conker's Bad Fur Day. As Conker begins his quest home, he comes across various areas where he will meet some of the wackiest characters you will ever see. I'm not kidding. Have you ever seen a sunflower with huge, yeah, you know, probably not. And how about a hillbilly pitchfork who chases after you while seemingly wanting to reenact scenes from Deliverance? I certainly hope not. As you progress through the game's world, you will essentially meet these characters in unusual situations, and in order to move through the game to the next area, you'll need to help them solve their issues, and in doing so, make their lives better. But coming from Rare, you expect something a little bit more special. With so many platformers following the basic idea of learning a new skill, then using said skill to progress into the next area, to then learn another skill and repeat, whilst collecting things along the way of course, Conker's Bad Fur Day does things a little bit differently. Conker himself is simplistic to control. Aside from an attack button and a jump button, there's actually very little you need to learn off the start. At frequent points in the game you'll come across contact sensitive pads on the ground. A light bulb appears above Conker's head and you'll be given an ability that directly relates to the task at hand. Take for instance the very first one you come across. Now when you start the game, controlling Conker is a bit of a nightmare. He's still absolutely hammered and he staggers around, just about managing to stay on his feet. After bumping into Birdie the Scarecrow and getting the lowdown on how to use context sensitive pads, the first one gives you an Alka-Seltzer which clears his head instantly, sobering him up, which then makes it possible to move him around with much more ease. As the game progresses, these pads become increasingly more interesting and give you weapons such as knives and guns, and also abilities which will greatly immerse you into the game further. This is because although you are not gaining a new permanent ability, whenever you see a new pad, you get the same sense of excitement in seeing exactly what weird and wonderful ability you will gain, because more often than not, it leads you into another epic encounter. Of course, all of this would be completely pointless if the game was not well written, and as you've no doubt guessed already by now, Conker's Bad Fur Day is one heck of a story. Now don't get me wrong, there are a large number of players who felt that the final ending to the game was something of a letdown, and it left them confused and almost cheated out of the 20 or so hours it took them to reaching the ending. However, like life itself, Conker's Bad Fur Day is more about the journey than the ending. Along the way, each character, creature and event that takes place flows seemingly together from one huge set piece to another. Taking inspiration from, well, too many movies to count really, you'll almost find yourself seeing subtle and not so subtle nods to popular movies at every turn. The characters at first will leave you laughing your arse off, as they come out with such profanity that you just never expect it in a Nintendo game. There's just so much variety in the jokes that there really is something in this game for everyone to find funny. I can't really think of a game which has so much humour in it, but also remains so enjoyable and playable at the same time. If there is one criticism that can be made of the gameplay, it's that there are frequently sections which are broken up by what are occasionally very lengthy cutscenes. With each area you play having so much action, there are times where the cutscenes are a welcome break, and they provide you with a chance to sit back, relax and enjoy where the bizarre story will go next. However, on other occasions, you'll almost get the Metal Gear Solid 4 feeling, whereby you play for just a few moments and bang, out of nowhere comes yet another cutscene. Thankfully though, once you've watched the cutscene once, you can skip it in subsequent times just with a simple tap of the L button. So it really does help with the pacing of the game somewhat. With so much gameplay packed into the start and finish of the core story, you no doubt miss some elements along the way, which does make this a perfect game to replay. It's no surprise to anyone that Rare often added collectibles in their games as a way to stretch out some additional gameplay hours from the player. Without the required items to collect in Conker's Bad Fur Day, this game can actually offer multiple playthroughs in a different way. It's more to do with it being a credit to not only the gameplay but also the excellent writing. One thing which always impressed me about Conker's Bad Fur Day were its graphics. Being a later N64 title and given the additional technical work by the studio, which I did mention previously, it should come as no surprise to anyone that this is one of the best looking games on the system. Conker as a character shows a ton of emotion, and he has specific facial expressions and body language depending on his mood and setting. If you see him in a wide, open, bright environment, he'll look very relaxed, but get him mad however and he scowls and grinds his teeth. Add to this lip-sync speech, not only from Conker but almost all of the other characters you come across, and you'll see that Rare were really pushing the console almost to its breaking point. The worlds themselves though are expertly designed and artistically a delight to see. Haunted houses have a classical eerie design and light particles dancing around the walls. Enter the beehive and you'll see gold and honey dripping down the walls with a shimmering glow. It's a step away from the other Rare games where almost everything seems bright and colourful. In Conker's Bad Fur Day there are occasions where things get a little darker, you could say a little murkier, and a little more brown coloured. No review of Conker's Bad Fur Day would be complete without discussing its audio, because let's face it, if you've ever been shown a video about the game, chances are it was the Great Mighty Pooh. The operatic introduction to what can only be described as the shittiest character in all of video gaming is quite honestly the highlight of the entire game for me. It's so good in fact that you may forget thereafter just how good the rest of the game's audio is. Robin Beanland did a great job with the entire composition and ensuring that the game's excellent visuals were matched by a soundtrack that is to behold. The main theme itself, like in many other Rare games, makes slight changes as you progress through the game or move from area to area. It's catchy, and yes, it will get stuck in your head, but with the entire game being in Dolby surround sound, it's when you get into the more confined areas of the game where it becomes a delight. As you move through wet tunnels, you hear drops of water coming from all areas. As enemies move and attack you from behind, you'll actually be able to hear them creeping up. Sure, I've always put Star Wars Rogue Squadron up there as having one of the best uses of surround sound on the N64, but Conker's Bad Fur Day is equally as good. The sound effects in the game are really as you'd expect, and they're not only great sounding, but there's so many hilarious sound effects which are used to bring the characters to life. And speaking of the characters, they're not only very well written, but the voice acting is what really brings them to life. Hearing a grumpy old bastard cog go crazy telling you to fuck off, and then being switched to a camp sounding character is perfect, and it was just a stroke of genius, and it's one example of many featured in the game. Once you've completed the game itself, there's also a fairly robust multiplayer mode to get stuck into. However, anyone expecting GoldenEye quality deathmatches may be disappointed, but it does serve up an interesting alternative to your gaming nights. There are a ton of variations on deathmatches and team-based matchups, but sadly the frame rate does begin to become an issue as more players are added. Although there are times in the main solo story mode where the frame rate dips slightly, in multiplayer it becomes much more frequent. I'd love to say it doesn't impact on your enjoyment of the multiplayer mode, but if things slow down as you're lining up a long distance sniper shot, you'll be the first to rage quit. Saying that though, it's way better than the multiplayer in Jet Force Gemini, and if you're a fan of third-person multiplayer games, this should be on your collection list already, along with games like Duke Nukem 0 Hour. On a side note, there is also a race mode, however with so little gameplay being put into this mode, it's hardly worth mentioning. If you want a multiplayer racing game with weapons, you should already know where to go to get your fix by now. Coming out so late in the Nintendo 64's life, I feel it would have been tough for reviewers to get excited about this game. Luckily though, despite the next generation of consoles being on the horizon, it's hard to find any negative reviews of this game from back in the day. Despite all of the praise it got though, the game sold well below expectations, and it had sold under 60,000 copies in its first year, so you could say it was more of a critical success than a commercial one. This didn't stop Rare thinking of where to take Conker next, however. A follow-up sequel entitled Conker's Other Bad Day was planned. Without spoiling the ending to this game for those that haven't seen it yet, the sequel to Conker's Bad Fur Day would have picked up exactly where this game ended and shown how Conker continued to live a colourful and messed up life. But alas, this game was eventually cancelled, and as was pretty much every other game to feature Conker, even after Live and Reloaded the 2005 remake. With Conker last appearing in Conker's Big Reunion as part of Project Spark, it seems that our hero was due a comeback. But with news that the remaining chapters were cancelled, there's only one question that I could possibly ask in this video. Do you ever think we will see Conker back again? With the Xbox version being more censored than the N64 version, do you think that publishers are willing to take a risk in promoting this style of game these days? And whilst you're here, I'd also love to know your most memorable moment when playing Conker's Bad Fur Day. Now I'm sure for many of you it will be the Great Mighty Pooh, but I've no doubt you'll have many more others to talk about. So sound off in the comments section down below, and until next time.